Good morning and welcome to Ananda, and welcome to all those that are tuning in via the internet. This is from Whispers from Eternity by Paramahansa Yogananda, entitled, Teach me, though crushed by criticism, to return always sweet forgiveness. Teach me to behave like the orange, which, though crushed and bitten, never fails to impart its sweetness. Battered by unkindness, gnawed at by carping criticism, or hewn with hard words and cruel behavior. Teach me yet to pour out unceasingly the sweetness of love. Teach me to be like snowflakes, which, when rubbed and beaten, give out only cleansing foam. Tried and tested by ingratitude, teach me nevertheless to offer in return the snow-white foam of wisdom. And from the New Path by Swami Kriyananda, this is drawn from the chapter Gardens, Mundane and Spiritual. It was, as I recall, sometime during August or September of 1949, that Paramahansa Yogananda acquired his last and most beautiful ashram property, 12 acres shaped by nature into a bowl around a miniature lake. This SRF lake shrine, as Master named it, nestled serenely in the arms of a broad curve formed by Sunset Boulevard, as, leaving the town of Pacific Palisades, it makes its final sweep down to the ocean. The property is one of the loveliest I have seen in a lifetime of world travel. Soon after Master obtained his property, he invited the monks out to see it. Walking its grounds, we were wonder-struck at their beauty. Happily, Master predicted, this will be a showcase for the work. Later on, he had us don bathing suits and enter the water with him. I am sending the divine light all through this lake, he said. Afterward, he said to us, this is holy water now. Whoever comes here in future will receive a divine blessing. Soon after acquiring the lake shrine, we began the task of preparing it for its public opening 1 year later. An abundance of trees, shrubs, and flowers were brought in and planted on the steep hillsides. Statues of leading figures in the great world religions were placed in picturesque spots about the grounds to emphasize Yogananda's teaching of the basic oneness of all religions. Where do you want the Buddha to sit? We inquired one day. Master was standing nearby directing operations. The Buddha prefers to remain standing, he replied with a quiet smile. In the early months of preparation, swarms of gnats proved an extreme nuisance. The fascination they demonstrated for our eyes, ears, and nostrils was anything but flattering. Master, I exclaimed in exasperation one day, what an irony! Why must so much beauty be spoiled by these flies? Calmly, Master replied, that is the Lord's way of keeping us ever moving toward Him. And so it is, one very often, perhaps even after one is anchored on the spiritual path, but certainly in the beginning, wonders who's managing this place, because there's so many things that are in need of attention. And so one can even embrace for a time atheism or be an agnostic and so on, because there's not this understanding that it's all God's play, and that if we will lift our consciousness, we'll see this great beauty, as Yogananda said. When you gaze about and see all this beauty, why gaze at the sewers? Over time, we begin to see that, as Yogananda again pointed out, there would be no play if there weren't villains. There has to be the villains. There has to be the gnats. There has to be all of these various nuisances. That's just how it is, or there would be no play. The play would dissolve. This is God's hobby, and this is what has been ordained. And so what are we going to do about it? And we understand early on, even as children, by making some basic observations, that even those that have a lot of hardships in their lives, perhaps we too have situations that are difficult for us, no doubt. Nevertheless, we find that if we can understand with the right spirit what is really going on, then we have no doubt that everything is being handled in a way that is not only perfection itself, but it's the hand of love. And it takes some doing, because the bombardment is unceasing. Being raised in the ocean, I would go surfing, and there would be some days where the waves would be very high. And so you'd get over one wave, and it was with tremendous effort. And then there would be the next wave. You think, oh my gosh, I don't know if I'm up for this. And so you'd paddle with all your might, just get over the wave, and you'd look, and much to your horror, there was a third wave. And sometimes you'd lose your board, because you just finally said, that's it, I'm swimming ashore. I've got to take a break. I can't hold on to this stick of wood any longer. Nature has won. And so sometimes retreat in life is appropriate. Hopefully one is a strong swimmer. And we find that we can regroup and go on. And so here was Swami Kriyananda, just as a young man in his early 20s, there at Lake Shrine with the Master in these high vibrations. And the gnats arrive. I've often thought, and really, I think that for all of us, we have seen this time and time again. Will there be something very beautiful that has happened? And then the Maya thinks, now what can I do? And so then there's the flat tire. After a beautiful concert on the way home, and we think to ourselves, this doesn't fit. I'm riding on these waves of inspiration, and now it's a flat tire. Oh my gosh, I hope I have a spare. Sometimes a spare is flat, and then the excitement really starts. So for us, it's a matter really of getting it. And that's why Swami Kriyananda said, and it was some time meditating on it, as a matter of fact, I still am. He said, seek God first for joy, because that will lubricate and cool the system. That will lighten the load. That will give us on a cellular level all that we need to make sure that we don't fall for the nuisances of life, that we are always with a reserve of joy. And then as that joy grows, naturally it blossoms into love. And the love grows and it blossoms into joy. And we see this wonderful play between these two magical qualities. And then, of course, many more. And that's the effort that is required day after day after day. I had a very interesting experience not too long ago. And I don't know if it's one of those recurring dreams or not, because sometimes those are there too, to give us needed lessons. God speaks to us too. When we're asleep, perhaps he's thinking a little less resistance. And so he'll, perhaps put in a little lesson or two to get our attention. Well, in this instance, I was deeply asleep. But it was time to wake up, and I couldn't wake up. And I was very, very conscious that this was going to be a battle. And I don't know if I was frightened, but I was extremely determined, because I didn't want to sleep anymore, and I was very, very keen on not having the subconscious rule the roost when the superconsciousness is in charge. The superconsciousness is in charge of the conscious mind, the subconscious mind. They all have a play, as we well know, throughout the day and in our sleep and so forth. And so there was a mighty struggle. And it was almost something that was physical. where with all of my mind and all of my heart and all that I could put into it was like a baby bird, doing all that it could to finally crack out of the egg. And we think, big deal, I could have easily done it myself, just give it a whack. But for the baby bird, now that was a different story. It was something to test its strength, and important for it in order to continue to grow in its journey. This was the first big test for the baby bird. And so after a lot of effort, finally, I burst on through. And it was really like coming up for air. It was a really profound experience. Now, can I call this a superconscious experience? I don't know what to say about that, but I can say that it was very helpful for me because I was able to think, as this was my first introduction on the spiritual path. So I was able to hearken back to this beautiful passage of Masters. From the Master said, the book has now been retitled to Sayings of Yogananda, where he said, yearn for God like a drowning man yearns for breath. That was it for me. Looking at his picture, the last smile, and reading that was it. And I knew that my life would be dedicated to following this path, even though I was young and at a tender age. That was all that I needed karmically. Yearn for God like a drowning man yearns for breath. I don't think that's much of a head scratcher in trying to figure out, gee, now what does that mean? That's kind of subtle. It's maybe, but I don't think so. It's a very, very strong statement, and something that we should draw to mind from time to time, or images or thoughts along those lines, to give us a sense as what is required in order to peck out of this shell of duality. The enormous effort. And that's why the Masters come. The Masters come to awaken us. That is their job. And so pretty soon we begin to become more of a yogi, more of a yogini, where we begin to see, this wakes me up. This thought, this feeling, this activity. And this puts me to sleep. And we're not fooled by it. We are not fooled by it at all. If I oversleep, then I am only going to be encouraging sleeping in this incarnation. Don't do that. If I'm doing something else, thinking unkind thoughts, what a beautiful reading that Roma read. That's going to dampen my enthusiasm. That's going to put me to sleep. And that's why the yogis say, spend time here. In Haranaloka, I'm not quite certain what to think of it, but in the autobiography of a yogi, we read in Haranaloka, where Sri Yukteswar is, those that go to Haranaloka are the ones that have achieved Nirvikalpa Samadhi. They're free. They cannot drop from that state of ecstasy. And they have their physical eyes. Apparently, when you leave this world, you go into the astral and you reclaim your young body. When we were young, Sri Yukteswar, no doubt, sense of humor, etc., he decided to keep his old body. Maybe to continue to scare people, the fear of God, whatever. Anyway, that's part of the Leela of the Masters. But in Haranaloka, they have the features as we have, but they have an eye that's open here. And the eye is wide open, and the physical eyes are half closed. And I thought, my gosh, entering the gate of Haranaloka, you might run for the hills, greeted by these people that you hardly knew what to think of, and yet their vibration, you would turn around if there was any hesitation, because that which emanated from these great ones and Haranaloka itself, not to mention Sri Yukteswar, would be such to say, well, I'm not quite used to that because I didn't experience that down on the earth. But if this is how it's done here, fine. Let's go for it. Interesting things that we read on the spiritual path. Some of the things need to be shelved. I don't know how many times over the years people have come and said, oh, I got on the path when we've asked them through the autobiography of a yogi, but I must admit there's some things I needed to shelve. And very often they will say, the chapter on the resurrection of Sri Yukteswar was one of them. So we have a good laugh, and they are sincere people, they're good people, and no doubt they'll plow through it all and get through to the other side. And so this entire experience that we are having needs to be whittled down so that we understand that really what we're trying to do in this world is to wake up. But that's only the first phase. It's like we chant in order to create the bridge to go into deep meditation. We wake ourselves up, and then taking the example of the masters to help wake up others. And so after a while, it begins to dawn on us, and what a revelation this is that it's a community service to lift our consciousness. It's a community service for our family and for our neighbors and for colleagues and anyone and everyone to keep our consciousness uplifted. And at one point, when that strikes home with enormous force, enough to keep it there in our consciousness at a steady anchor, then we're just not that interested in taking as many cat naps and sleeping through this world. Because as Yogananda said, and what a statement this is, about Mount Washington, there's lots of rats and mice living here on the ashram grounds, but they're not advancing spiritually. I thought, oh, those poor things, oh well, at least they're around Mount Washington, so yeah, it's a start. And so we can't take for granted that though we're on the spiritual path, that, oh, it's a cakewalk now. And there won't be any brambles along the way. There won't be all of these things that we face. A lot of times, those that are new on the path or those that have been many years on the path wonder why it continues to be all of this testing. Life is a struggle for joy all along the way. May I fight to win the battle on the very spot where I now am. Those are Yogananda's words, a struggle for joy. So if that's the game, and it is, if that's the game, then we know that we need to know how to play the game. And that is going to require sustained enthusiasm. That's going to require good sportsmanship so that we don't think for a moment, which is really suicide for the devotee, that we're being treated unfairly. We are not being untreated unfairly. Everything that comes to us has been drawn by our own karma. If we want to think about being treated, think about being treated fairly. God takes half of our karma, and Guru comes along and says, well, that's pretty good, but let me take another 25%. Now that's being treated fairly. The rest of this that goes around in our minds, if it brings our energy down and it encourages self-involvement and all of this, it's of no use to us. It's of no value. All it's going to do is to keep us in a stupor. And so there are times, there's no doubt, where the pummeling that happens is a bit much. And we think, well, what are we going to do about it? Well, a very good exit to this period of testing that we might have, and none of us are spared, is to think, well, that's okay. I may be having a difficult time with my own environment right now, this temple of God, but let me use this time to see what I can do to help others. Just like Swami, what a classic experience this was. Here he was thrown out of self-realization fellowship back in 1962. It was such a devastating experience that he wanted to die. And this was a soul that Swami Kriyananda said would be free in this life. And so what was the great surprise for him, where he was trying to figure things out. And he went to seclusion in Sedona, Arizona in the States and gained inspiration there. And he wanted to, and did, begin a retreat, the seclusion retreat, but then everybody found out that Swami Kriyananda was there out in the woods, and could they join him? So that was the end of his seclusion, and so forth. But at this particular period in 1965 in San Francisco, where he was teaching, prior to getting the land there in Northern California, the seclusion retreat and the village to follow, He was giving classes. He had been asked to by a friend and to chant and all of that. And it was such a shock and such a surprise to him when someone came up and said, "I feel so much joy in your presence." And he thought, well, maybe they were attending some other lecture, because it was the last thing that he felt. He was suffering so deeply, he couldn't even listen to Master's voice. And he loved Master deeply. That's how heavy the test was. He felt he was abandoned. And we know that when tests come, we feel, well, God has abandoned us. Of course, it's ridiculous, because again, God is a director playing all parts. How can he abandon us when he's playing all parts, including us? Hard to believe, but there it is. And so he felt to go inside and see if indeed they were telling the truth. They were feeling joy coming from him. And he had to admit that beneath the suffering and turmoil, as he was trying to find his way, there was that joy. And as he was able to identify that joy, and he became aware of that joy, of course, it began to percolate throughout his system. And it wasn't long before he began to do all that he could, and it was extremely busy time for him to form Ananda. In those early days, no one understood communities at all. They just didn't know what to think of it, because it was that was during the community movement, whereas Swamiji used to joke, communities last 1 month. Why that? Because at the end of the month the rent was due. And so the community dissolved. I can't be a part of this. This is gross materialism, you know. Paying rent, forget it. I'm going to go and see if I can find another community where they have their trip together, and so forth. As we used to tease at Ananda, I think this came from Nayaswami Jyotish, in the beginning, when we were just learning, about, how to build community and so forth and so on. Jyotish's comment was, in the beginning, when you came to Ananda village, if you chanted Om, then you were accepted. And it was a bit like that. There were some real rowdies there in the early years. But then Divine Mother thought, this is too much. So 8 years later, 1976, she created a forest fire. She burned almost the whole place down. And all of those hanger-ons all left. I don't think there was one exception. And for us, we didn't give a second thought. Did this mean that this was the end of community? We had already had our example from Master when his temple in Encinitas fell into the sea. What did he say? I got 2 more temples out of that. He salvaged the rugs, he salvaged different things, and other temples then were born. We felt the same. The place was devastated, it looked horrible. But in no time, the trees grew back. We rebuilt homes far better than the early ones that we built. I think in part, Divine Mother might have thought, these houses are really bad. This is the first community. I'm kind of embarrassed to show my friends. These what we call plastic palaces and things like that. And they were literally that. So better strike the match and, they'll regroup and move forward. And then the skilled carpenters, electricians, plumbers began to arrive, and the buildings came up, and they were, of course, much lovelier than the first ones by a long shot. And so for us, really, and we know this lesson, but we can't learn it enough, we have to constantly break right. That's all. Break to the positive. Break in a way that's expansive. Give that joy when we don't even feel it, as Swamiji did. That in the beginning is a bit of an affirmation. But we can try it as scientists, and we see, my goodness, the joy is always there. Even if I don't have it, let me give it and see if maybe God will take pity on me and use me as an instrument for joy. Very fascinating, the things that can be accomplished when we set our mind. This is why Yogananda said imagination is one of the greatest gifts given to us. We imagine, we affirm, and then those things come to us that we are yearning for. And so the spiritual path needs to be kept fun. When years ago, Roma and I were newlyweds, we went to an astrologer and she read our charts with interest because I was a Virgo and she was the Pisces, and it was like, how's that going to work out? We did learn opposites attract. But what did she say to us? You guys need to learn to have fun. We thought, that's very good. It's very, very good. And that's for us. What is fun? Fun is joy. And joy is fun. So that was a lesson for us. But that's the lesson for all the billions that are here on this earth. Because as we're able to tune into that joy, that beautiful quality of God, joy is God and God is joy, we begin to find that we're able to wake up with ease. It's not difficult for us because we are other-minded, as Yogananda recommended. Be other-minded. Be in the watchful state. Don't take ourselves too seriously, as Swami Kriyananda said. Kriyananda is an event that I'm responsible for. And so in that way, we do what we can to behave. We do what we can to be instruments for the light, to be instruments for love and joy. But at the same time, we go through all the experiences of life with good cheer. God bless you.